Today, we're going to unpack a vision that has absolutely captivated people for thousands of years, a promise of a world with no more war. It's one of the most famous, hopeful, and, fiercely debated prophecies ever written, and it comes right out of the ancient book of Isaiah.
I mean, just listen to those words. This isn't just religious poetry. This is one of the most profound visions for peace you'll ever read. It speaks to this deep, fundamental hope that all of us have, that one day all this conflict will just stop.
And that, right there, is the big puzzle. It's a beautiful, beautiful promise, but it raises this massive question that is just echoed through history. When? When does this incredible transformation actually happen? That's the mystery we're going to dig into today.
Now, to really get the promise, we first have to understand the problem. You see, this vision of peace wasn't delivered in some peaceful, happy time. No, it was part of something that reads a whole lot more like a courtroom drama.
So, the book of Isaiah kicks off not with a gentle poem, but with a formal indictment. It's like God, speaking through the prophet, is the prosecutor, laying out a legal charge against the nation of Israel. And the charge? Rebellion.
And the specific Hebrew word used here is fascinating. It's pasha. This wasn't a word for, a toddler having a tantrum. This was a political term. It meant to deliberately break a formal treaty, a covenant. So this wasn't just them misbehaving. This was a fundamental breach of their sacred national agreement with God.
So what was the evidence for this rebellion? Well, here's the twist. It wasn't that they stopped being religious. They were still offering sacrifices. They were still praying. The problem was deep hypocrisy. God's case essentially was that their hands were full of blood from injustice, while their mouths were just full of empty religious phrases. He didn't want more rituals. He wanted righteousness.
But, a legal indictment isn't always the end of the story. Right in the middle of this really harsh judgment, the prosecutor does something surprising. He offers the defendant a choice. He lays out two very, very different futures.
This is just a stunning moment in the trial. "Let us reason together" is actually legal language. It means, let's argue the case out. But right when the case against Israel seems totally airtight, God makes this incredible offer: complete and total forgiveness. A chance to wipe the slate clean, no matter how bad the evidence looked. But that offer came with a condition. Their future wasn't set in stone. It was a choice, plain and simple. Path number 1, be willing and obedient, and you get blessing. Path number 2, keep resisting, keep rebelling, and you face the curse, to be devoured by the sword. The ball was in their court.
Okay, so with that legal drama as the backdrop, let's circle back to our original mystery. When do the swords become plowshares? Well, the key to unlocking this whole puzzle might just be hiding in a single, crucial Hebrew phrase.
The prophecy begins by saying that this great era of peace will happen aharit yayamim. And trust me, how we understand these two little words changes literally everything about when we expect this vision to come true.
So literally, the phrase just means in the afterward on the days. It sounds a little vague, doesn't it? And that's exactly where the debate starts. Is this just a general sometime in the future kind of thing, or is it something way more specific?
You basically have two main possibilities. Does it just mean sometime down the road, in a non-specific way? Or, over time, has it become a kind of technical, theological term for the end times, the final chapter of history? Our entire timeline really hinges on that answer.
And to make it even more interesting, we have to try and step into a totally different worldview. The scholar John Oswald points out something fascinating. He says for the ancient Hebrews, the past was what was in front of them. It was known, you could see it. The future was behind them, unseen, something they backed into. This cultural mindset alone suggests the phrase might not have the same precise forward-looking meaning we tend to give it.
So, with all these clues on the table, the legal case, the two paths, this ambiguous phrase, how do we start to piece this puzzle together? Well, let's look at one really influential interpretation from the scholar E.J. Young. Young argues that yes, the last days is a technical term, but, and this is a big but, he defines it as the entire era that we are living in right now, the age of the church, the time between Christ's first arrival and his eventual return. The implication of this is kind of mind-bending. It means the prophecy of peace isn't just for some distant future, it's something that is unfolding in some way as we speak.
So I know what you're thinking. How can a prophecy about the end of war be happening now, in a world that is clearly still filled with conflict?
Young's conclusion is that the prophecy is being absolutely fulfilled, but in principle. The idea is that the spiritual reality of peace is being established in the hearts of people through the gospel, even if its full physical expression is still waiting for the future.
Now, what I find so compelling here is that Young himself admits this is a difficult conclusion to reach. He acknowledges the tension. He's not trying to give us an easy answer. Instead, he's offering the one he feels is most faithful to all the pieces of the puzzle, including other biblical passages that say war will continue until the very end. This isn't a solved case, it's an ongoing, deeply complex investigation.
But let's just step back from the difficult mechanics for a moment and come back to the sheer power of the vision itself. The prophet Micah gives a parallel prophecy, and he adds this beautiful personal detail. It's not just about nations no longer fighting. It's about every single person living in perfect security with peace and prosperity, with absolutely nothing to be afraid of.
And so, regardless of when we think the final fulfillment will be, the vision itself leaves us with this profound question. Whether it's being fulfilled in principle right now or it's waiting for a distant future, how does this powerful promise of a world without war challenge the way we live in a world that very much still has it? Now, that's something worth thinking about.